Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our ongoing Daniel Pearl Education Center lecture series. And we're very happy to be with you here tonight. For those of you that are on YouTube and that do not know who the Daniel Pearl Education Center is, my name is Andy Boyarsky. I'm the chairman of a fantastic committee at Temple B'nai Shalom in East Brunswick. I'm just the messenger. The committee does all the work, and I get some of the glory by being able to speak with you and introduce our speakers. So to start off tonight, I would like to introduce our Rabbi Eric Eisenkramer, who would have a couple words to say.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you all for being with us this evening for what I think will be a very informative and powerful evening. I hope everyone out there is staying safe and healthy and all is well. I'd like to thank Andy and the entire Daniel Pearl Education Center committee for continuing to offer these wonderful speakers and enrichment. And even in these difficult times that we're living through, we're able to be together virtually and learn together and hear from wonderful speakers. I'm very much looking forward this evening to hearing from our speaker and, of course, for Mark Newhouse. Of course, the Shoah, the Holocaust, is part of our Jewish history that must remain alive. We must never forget. Not too long ago this year, we remembered the 75th anniversary of Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass, and these terrible events must go on so that we can have a better and a better future. So thank you all for being with us. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Rabbi. So before I have my introduction, for those of you that are on YouTube and are watching, and there is a chat line on YouTube, and please, if you have any questions, put them in and we'll have a question and answer session at the end of Mark's presentation. So as many of you know, the Daniel Pearl Education Center has been committed to Holocaust education since our inception. We run a yearly trip to the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, bringing bar mitzvah age children and the same age children from our local churches and youth groups, and it's a very ecumenical group. We brought more than 1,000 children to the Holocaust Memorial. And in the background, which is one of the nice things about Zoom, is actually called the wall of tiles at the museum itself. These are all tiles that are painted by children to get their ideas of the Holocaust. And when you go to the museum, it is an incredibly powerful wall. And when we have our trip, this is where we start our adventure. Unfortunately, because of all of the doings this year, we're not going to be able to go, but we certainly look forward to going again in the future. As you know, we've hosted multiple survivors from Daniel Pearl, and we've initially participated with the New Jersey State Holocaust Committee, and we've enjoyed working with them. This is why tonight's speaker is so important to us. His parents survived Auschwitz and Buchenwald, so it's in his blood to write about Holocaust, and it's in his blood to write about the trilogy that he wrote about of the Lodz Ghetto. If you're at the museum, there is a portion of the display that deals directly with the Lodz Ghetto. So I thought it was quite very interesting that when we found out about Mr. Newhouse, that this was where he got his inspiration. Among his many works now is an award-winning trilogy of books called The Devil's Bookkeeper. And I would encourage you, after you hear this, I'm sure that you're going to want to go over to Amazon or to Kindle and get his books to see the amazing stories that he has to tell. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce directly from the villages in Florida, Mark Newhouse. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you very much, Daniel Pearl Education Center, for doing this. I think I'm very honored to be able to present and speak to an organization named after Daniel Pearl. When most people find out that I'm an author now, they run the other way because they think I'm here to sell books. And what I tell people is, I'm not here to sell books, I'm here to sell myself. And this is probably the most difficult kind of presentation that I ever have to do. And you'll find out why in just a few minutes. But I always like to start with a joke. And I use this joke, and I call it the world's rottenest joke. I use this every year with my classes. So if you'll forgive me, let me begin with this story of a man, and he's lost in a desert. And all he can think about as he's lost in the desert is that he needs water to survive. And so he's crawling through this desert, and all of a sudden a camel comes toward him. And the driver on the camel says to him, Mister, you look terrible. How can I help you? And the man says, I need water. I need water. I need water. And the man on the camel says, oh, mister, I have no water for you, but I can give you a beautiful tie. Well, the man on the camel says, what am I going to do with a tie in the middle of the desert? And so the man on the camel rides off. Well, the man in the desert is dying, and I have to warn you, I can make this joke last an hour and a half for my students. I promise I won't do that to you. But the very next day, the man is in the desert and he knows he's going to die. And all he can think about again is that he needs water, desperately needs water. And again, the man comes toward him on a camel and says to him, Mister, you look terrible. How can I help you? And the man says, water. I need water. And again, the man says, I'm sorry, sir. I don't have any water for you, but I can give you a beautiful tie. And the man says, what am I going to do with a tie in the desert? And he turns it down again. Well, the third day, the man knows he's going to die. And so he's crawling through the desert and crawling through the desert, and there is no hope whatsoever when suddenly he sees another camel. And there's a man on the camel. And the man says to him, sir, you look terrible. How can I help you? And he says, please, water, water. And the man says, I don't have any water, but I can give you a beautiful tie. And the man again turns it down. Well, he's on his last legs when all of a sudden he sees a sign, and the sign says Oasis a mile away. So he crawls and crawls and crawls, and he gets to the oasis, and suddenly he sees a huge staircase, and he pulls himself up these stairs. And when he gets to the top of the stairs, he sees the entrance to a beautiful hotel. So he pulls himself toward the hotel. And when he gets there, a man pops out of the hotel door and says, oh, sir, I'm sorry, you can't come into the hotel without a tie. Now, I warned you. I said this was a rotten joke. But the truth is, I never tell a joke unless there's a purpose. And I told this joke every year to my 6th grade students. And yes, before I was an author, I'm very proud that I was a teacher on Long Island, and I was also an adjunct professor at SUNY Old Westbury. And I told this joke every single year. Now, I'm not in the habit of wasting time, so why tell this joke? Well, think about it for a minute. What is that tie? The tie is the key to the man's survival. So why doesn't he take it? Because he doesn't know. No one has taught him it's the key to his survival. When I spoke to my students, I would say to them, what is the key to your survival? And most of them said they didn't know. Education is the key to their survival. Why didn't the man realize that? Well, because he was too focused on something else. He was focused on getting water. And the people on the camel never taught him what that tie really meant to him. That was the key to his survival. In a way, that is why I am here. Because many people think of the Holocaust as something that is a historic event that was in the past. But it is the shadow that has been part of my life, all my life. And it is not something that is in the past. It is something we have to learn from, we have to understand, and we have to teach our children, because we are the people on the camel. And if we don't do it, no one else will. So I'm not here because I want revenge. I'm not here out of hate, but I'm here because of education, because that is the key that this that we can make this never, ever happen again. As I said, this talk is difficult for me for many reasons. One of the reasons is because I knew so little about what my parents actually went through, and I still don't know how they survived. My story begins in 5th grade. We moved from New Jersey to Queens, New York, and I had a young teacher. And this young teacher was a wonderful teacher. And one day she had a great idea. She said, you know what? We're gonna have a special day. So she handed out paper and she handed out crayons, and we all made invitations, except one student did not make an invitation. And this student happened to be one who cared so much and wanted to do everything the teacher wanted him to do. So the teacher came over to my desk and said, Mark, why don't you make an invitation? The teacher's idea was to have a grandparent day. The problem was, I didn't have any grandparents. I had lost my grandparents during the Holocaust. So when a teacher said to me, Mark, why aren't you doing it? Why aren't you making this invitation for this wonderful event? I said, my grandparents were murdered. She stood there looking at me and she asked, I think she was in shock. And I could not explain to her at that time what that meant, because I myself did not understand it. In those days, back in the 50s, most elementary school teachers particularly did not talk about the Holocaust. And they really didn't understand a child who was born in Germany in 1947, 2 years and 1 day after my mother was freed from Auschwitz. And I was born in a displaced persons camp, which I only found out, by the way, this year. In August of 1948, my parents came to America with me as a baby, and they struggled. Like most immigrants, they struggled to learn the language, to work, and unfortunately, they struggled with each other. They did not have a good marriage, and so my childhood was a bit different, perhaps, than what it should have been. I was very lonely, and so one of the things that I did was I turned to writing. I did not learn very much about the Holocaust. I knew my parents were in the Lodz Ghetto, but I had no idea what the Lodz Ghetto really was. And they never really talked about it. When they talked about the Holocaust, they would sit on the couch in our living room and they would talk with their friends, but often in Polish, Yiddish, and German. What they didn't know was that I understood a lot of what they were saying in Polish and Yiddish. And I was picking up little scraps. And for a long time, I had terrible nightmares. And I began to realize that there was something in my past that was a true monster, something that as a child, I could not understand and was so frightening to me. Later on, I began to write about my feelings. This is a poem I wrote when I was about 12 years old. It's called My Secret Nightmares. It colored me like ink dropped on a white sheet. Stray remarks overheard as adults spoke in foreign tongues of their horror stained in blood. I heard the marching boots long after my parents' friends were gone, all safe in their homes again. But my nightmares lived on. In night-shattering dreams, doors exploded, terrified screams, lives imploded. Mom, dad, grandparents all pass unknown. Black-helmeted wolves rip us from our home. Get out, you dirty Jewish dogs. Human cries echo in nightmare fogs. Darkness smashed by bullets' light. Human trash hurled into the night. Garbage trucks pick up tattered stars. Endless trains of cattle cars. Naked women, naked men. You'll never see your home again. Water turns to cyclone doom. Screams and prayers in shower room. Silence, fire, smoke. Burnt meat smell, deep ash pits, Auschwitz. Here comes the train to hell. When you have nightmares like that, and you have the kinds of situations I had with my parents, especially with my father, who was a very powerful, strict, abusive man, you really don't go about asking much about their past. They were too busy with their own lives. And like the man in the desert who only knew that he needed water, I did not understand how important it was for me to learn about the Holocaust, both as a child and as an adult. And as I grew older, other problems took precedence. One of the problems I had was there was a bully, and this bully was constantly picking on me. And one day he found his way to my home, and he was outside my house, and I was sitting at my desk, and I didn't know what to do about this bully. And suddenly I saw a pile of paper on my desk and a pen, and I began to write a story. And the story was called Potato Chip and the Bully. And it was the first time I realized that I could solve a lot of my problems with a pen, which was like a magic wand to me. And I wrote the story, and the next day I brought it to my school, and I gave it to my teacher. And my teacher was really the first one who showed pride in me. She took my story and she put it up on a bulletin board and put a big gold star on it. And that was the first time I realized that a pen was magic and could help me solve problems. When I became a teacher, I used the pen and the computer to solve the problems of my students. And I created books and educational materials to help my students and to help me. And I became so involved in that I began to create fictional characters, monsters that won awards and helped my students, but in a sense buried the real monsters that were inside me, including the past, the Holocaust, that was a shadow always over my life. Once I retired, I moved to Florida in 2002, and I began a writing group in Florida, in the villages, and I began to enter contests. And I was fairly successful at those contests. In the meanwhile, my mother made a tape for Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation, and she gave me a copy of it. To be very honest with you, I did not look at it. I was still afraid. The Blonde Angel. The sight of an angel we long to see, gossamer wings, gold, shimmery, promise hope and light where no hope can be. Guardian angels glowing bright, our protectors day and night. Why do I see your hollow eye stare, black uniformed nightmare? My parents, grandparents saw an angel. They stood on endless lines with faceless others, brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, naked, head shaved, holding their breath, being judged by the angel of death. Starched uniform, no silvery gown, blonde hair, no sparkling crown, demon smile, dripping guile. He held the key to life, finger deadly as a knife, points in air. You've won, door one, to nothingness, nowhere. Grandparents sent to the door, disappear, see no more. Sent to unmarked graves, mom, dad, made angel slaves. He sends them all to his darkest pits. In this hell he rules, Auschwitz. I dream of seeing angels in my nightmares. So I didn't see my mother's tape for a long time, partly because I was afraid, and again, because I was so focused on my career, my marriage, raising children, that I did not really understand the lesson that I was missing out on, the importance of this shadow that was following me all my life. One day, my son came home from college, and he is a beautiful, beautiful person. He actually owns our publishing company now. And when he came home, he said to me he had an assignment to do, and it was to write about the Holocaust. And he said, "Dad, weren't your parents in the Holocaust?" How could he not know that? And I realized it was my fault. So I took out the tape and I watched my mother, who was in her late 70s, an elegant, very petite, a sickly woman, but very strong, probably one of the first female liberationists. And she was speaking to a graduate student. A stranger was interviewing her. And she had forgotten a lot of her past. But I realized something, which is I was the one who should have written. I was the one who should have interviewed her. Anyway, my son asked me why I didn't write her story. And I didn't really have an answer. One line grabbed me that she said. And afterwards, I entered a contest and I won the contest with a story based on that one line. Before I submitted that contest, I wrote based on a true incident. When I won the contest, one of the judges wrote a haunting work of fiction. I didn't share that story with my sons, and I didn't share it with my mom. And for 2 years, I kept that story to myself. Well, we were visiting my mother down in Miami, and I just said to my wife I was going to bring that story with me because it was in a book and give it to my mom. And my wife said to me, you know, don't do it because she may be hurt by it. And I had broken one of my own rules, which is before I write anything, I research it very, very thoroughly. And in this case, because of the deadline, I had not done that. Anyway, the last hour that I was in Miami with my mom, I took out the book and I gave it to her. And I said, Ma, I'd love for you to read this. It won an award. It's based on something you said. And I will come back in a month and I will interview you and I will write the story the way it should be written. We drove home. It was about a 4.5 hour drive. We drove home and I made arrangements to visit my mother a month later. 2 days before I was going to visit my mom, oh, I forgot. After I got home from Miami, there was a phone call from my mom. And my mother said to me, Maxilla, that's what she used to call me, it means little Max, which was my name in Germany. She said, Maxilla, I love the story, but I wish you had gotten the facts from me before you wrote it. So I told her, I said, look, I will be down next month and I will do it right. And I'll write a story you'll be proud of. 2 days before we drove down there, I got a phone call from my stepfather that mom was in the hospital in Aventura. My wife and I raced down to Miami and I missed her by 10 minutes. I held her hand. I told her I loved her. She was my role model. But I lost my mother and I lost her story. What was the story? Well, mom lived in Lodz, Poland. And to be honest with you, I knew nothing really about it. She had a big family and I knew almost nothing about them as well. Something she did kept her family out of Auschwitz, most of the family, until nearly the end of the war. I never knew about that. But in her tape to that graduate student, she had said one thing that stuck in my mind. that she had a job in a warehouse in Lodz, and that she was told to check the pockets, to check the liners, to run her hand flat on the clothing. In other words, she was checking clothing for things left there by men, women, children who were killed in Auschwitz and the other death camps. Before she died, Mom gave me a book. It was a chronicle of the Lodz Ghetto. It was published by Yale University Press in 1984, and it's an extremely thick book. I put it in my closet, and I guess I got busy again, and I didn't read it. And then one day I pulled it out, and I noticed it was signed by the editor and the translator and dedicated to my mom. So I sat down on the floor, and I began to read the chronicle of the Lodz Ghetto. And as I read it, I realized that these were mostly anonymous, and they were basically entries of daily events in the ghetto. And I thought to myself, how little I knew and how much I owed my children and future generations to explain to them what really happened there. And an idea kept buzzing through my head that I had to write this. But you know, bullied children, abused children, they don't have a lot of confidence, and I did not have a lot of confidence. And though I had written books for children, mysteries that had won awards, this was beyond me. I didn't think I could do this, but I sat down at the computer and an idea kept buzzing in my head. One of my favorite movies is 12 Angry Men. And I kept seeing these men in a claustrophobic room sharing their feelings about the different things happening to them. So I began to type, and in 30 days, I had 700 pages written. It was honestly as if the spirits of my dead ancestors, of the relatives I lost in the Lodz Ghetto, were writing the book through me. I still wasn't convinced, so I entered it in a contest. And the first year I entered it, it didn't win. It became a finalist. And rather than being discouraged, I looked at the judge's notes, and one of them made a lot of sense. It said, the book is too long. 700 pages is a long book. You should cut it in half. And so I did. And the following year, when I entered the contest, the book won Best Published Book of the Year and a gold medal in historical fiction. And now it is out on Amazon and Kindle. But most importantly, my children and grandchildren will now know what I didn't know in a story that is fiction, but closely follows what happened in the Lodz Ghetto. So let me take you now to the Lodz Ghetto so you can see for yourselves a little bit of what happened there. So allow me for a minute to share my screen. And I have to tell you, technology is not my strong point, but let's see what I can do here. Okay, and this is the cover of my book. And one thing that I have to say is I finished my third volume of this trilogy 2 or 3 weeks before the quarantine began. And it made me very grateful for what we have. So the book is called The Devil's Bookkeepers, and it's about the Lodz Ghetto from 1941 to 1944. And yes, it really happened, but we must make sure it never happens again to anyone. This is one of the few photographs my parents brought from Europe with them. When my father came to America, he had $5 in his pocket. He was an amazing businessman. The girls, one of them is my aunt, who died sometime during the war. And the girl with the very serious face is my mother. It's as if she could see the future. It's the only picture I have of her as a child. This is one of my aunts who I just recently discovered died in the Warsaw Ghetto. Her eyes are absolutely haunting. And what I do when I write a book is I try and use photographs of people to model my characters. People always ask me, how do you keep track of characters? So I kept going back and forth on whether to use my aunt's picture on my book. And I finally decided to do it because I felt it would honor her memory, because there are no tombstones, there are no memorials for her and most of my family. And she became the model of my character Miriam, who was given by her parents to the hero of my book, Ostrovsky, for protection. And apparently she may or may not fall in love with another man. She is a very strong person whose innocence fades as she faces the reality of what's going on in the Lodz ghetto. This is another one of my mother's sisters. And I just don't know how anybody could want to hurt a child this beautiful. She became the model for Regina, who's a beautiful child of Ostrovsky and Miriam. I've always believed a child is hope and a candle in the darkness, a reason to survive. Now, the chairman of the ghetto promises to protect the children. All I can tell you is that if I had been born 2 years earlier in the Lodz ghetto, I probably wouldn't be here now. This is one of the only pictures I have of my mom and my dad holding me when I was a baby in Germany. And I use this picture of my father as the model for Ostrovsky, who's an engineer. And he's loyal to the chairperson of the ghetto, whose name is Romkowski. And he is the eyes and the ears through whom we see the various things that happen that give both horror and hope to the residents. This is one of the few pictures they brought with them. And we've been trying to identify this. I believe this is where they lived when I was born, in Germany. This is another picture that's been a mystery to us. That's my mom holding me as a baby. And we didn't know what this building was. And then someone pointed out the 4 holes by the window and said it was probably once a prison and it may have held bars. And I used that picture to honor my mom for the second book of my series. One of the people in the book is Singer, and I modeled him after this photograph of my dad as a young man. And he's my mystery man. Every book has to have a mystery man, I guess, not an anti-hero, I would call him. But the strange thing is most people find him the one that they most identify with. This is my mother holding my grandson shortly before she passed away. She was a remarkable woman. And this is my wife and me at the awards ceremony. And let me see. Oh, this is us when we got married. And this is my son, who the same night won an award for his first book. He's a chip off the old block, and I'm very proud of him. Okay. My book is based on the Chronicle of the Lodz Ghetto, 1941 to 1944. And it was translated by Lucian Dobrzycki and published by Yale University Press, 1984. And I received permission to use the quotes from the book as a way of introducing the entries. This is the entrance to the ghetto. You can see the barbed wire. The Lodz ghetto was second only to the Warsaw ghetto. No one knows exactly how many people were in these ghettos, but Lodz was estimated to have about 205,000 people. Of those, less than 5,000 survived. Warsaw was the largest with 400,000. The Lodz ghetto is the yellow space, and to the north and to the east, you can see Warsaw. And if you go south and west, you'll see Oswiecim, which is where Auschwitz was. One of the most famous things about the ghettos were these bridges. And this bridge was for the Jewish laborers. They were not allowed to go on the same street as the Germans. It plays a very important part in the story of the Lodz ghetto. You can see streetcars. The Jews were not allowed to use the streetcars. This is a street in the Lodz ghetto. You'll notice there are no automobiles. They were not allowed to have automobiles. This was a slum in the industrial city of Lodz. Lodz had always been an industrial city. The leader of the Lodz ghetto was appointed by the Germans, and he was a real mystery. I really, in school, they never talked about him. I didn't know anything about him until I started reading the Chronicle of the Lodz ghetto. My parents never spoke about him. His name was Chaim Rumkowski, and he was the eldest of the Jews. He was appointed by the Germans, and nobody knows exactly why. And history has to judge him, because to some people he's considered a savior. To others, he is considered a collaborator. Some called him the devil. He believed work would save the Jews of the ghetto, but would it save 200,000 lives? He promised to protect the children of the ghetto, and there are real questions of whether or not he did try. He's famous for a speech he made, which ends book 2. He was a very powerful orator, and below him you can see policemen. He built his own secret police force, and he used them to enforce the German decrees and his own decrees. They were as feared as the Gestapo. As I said, he was known as a collaborator, and he always said history would judge him. But to be very honest with you, history hasn't been very kind to him. Here he is meeting with the German high command that kept him waiting the whole day until they arrived. This is another view of his police force. They were the ones responsible for gathering the Jews who would be deported to the concentration camps and to the death camps. And no one really knows when he and they knew the final destination. This is a street in the Lodz ghetto. You'll notice the stars on the front and back of the coats. It was a crime not to wear them. This is the market in the ghetto. And the man standing in the suit is Hans Bibo, who was the German ghetto administrator. One of the major things that you'll see as you study the ghetto is child labor. And children who could not work were considered extra mouths to feed. So Rumkowski's plan was to get as many children as possible working. One of the things I learned about my father was he changed his name and he changed his birth date many times so he would not be deported, because no one knew where the deportees were going. This is another scene of the child laborers. Many of these pictures were taken in secret by two men who were taking pictures through their coats, because if they were caught, they would be killed. Here's another scene of child laborers. No horses, no automobiles. The deportations, no one knew where they were going to. People would not be allowed to take many possessions with them. Starvation, cold, and disease were weapons used by the Germans. These are people digging for anything they can find in a garbage dump. Rumkowski's plan was that if he could keep the ghetto running smoothly, that the Germans would not interfere. As the war progressed, the Germans became more intrusive. The smooth running ghetto was Rumkowski's goal, but after a while, even he could not maintain that illusion. These are shoes. This is a picture I took at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and it is a very important element in the story of the Lodz Ghetto. It was probably the first clue when the chroniclers began to realize what was happening. Children were separated from their parents and sent in cattle cars to unknown destinations. We now know that many of them went to Auschwitz, including my mother and my father. My father ended up in Buchenwald, which is where Joni's mother was. And we know what happened in Auschwitz. My book, by the way, does not deal with Auschwitz at all. My book is really about the struggle for life and survival and love in the ghetto. And the reason I wrote it, and the reason I'm speaking, is I don't want this to ever happen to anyone ever again. I just learned that my book has now been entered into the collection in Melbourne, Australia, and we just had the release of an audiobook. So I'm very proud of that and very excited because I heard the actor who read the audiobook, and it was just amazing to hear my words being said by someone else. Some of the things you can do to learn more are you can contact the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. You can see the photographs of the Lodz Ghetto that were taken by Henrik Ross and Mendel Grossman. There are a number of great books, and there's a wonderful documentary called The Lodz Ghetto Inside a Community Under Siege. Let's see if I can end this. Oh, wait a minute. I think I just, here we go. I'd like to end with one more poem. I hope I haven't run over. I wrote this for a temple's commemoration of Kristallnacht a few years ago. They shattered the glass, and so it starts. They attacked our past. They could not kill our hearts. They lit up the night with cries of hate, but could not extinguish the light of our faith. They tried to crush us under their heels, but we survived because of God's will. 1,000 synagogues they ruthlessly burned as mobs rampaged with hatred learned, setting fire to our shops, beating those they might meet, a night of murder in the hate-darkened street. A night heralding a longer night of fear, our cries falling on the world's deaf ears. The death camps opened their poisonous hands, and the hate flowed freely in many lands. November 9th, 1938, an explosion of unchecked hate. The Kristallnacht that brought the long December, a night of rage we must remember. 6 million more stars soared into the sky, and still the flame of our faith would not die. The light of our beliefs we hold dear, our heritage from the past, even as once again we hear the frightening echoes of broken glass. My father always believed there would be another Holocaust, and he always tried to protect himself in America. Do I believe there'll be another Holocaust? No. I believe education and love are the most important things that we can learn as messages from the Holocaust. And I hope I brought some of that optimism, some of that hope to you. Yes, there was a Lodz ghetto. Hopefully, there never will be one again. Thank you very much for being here with me. I wish I could see your faces. It's so much easier to do a presentation when you have a live audience. If I have another minute, I'll tell one final joke, and that'll be it, okay? One Friday, I was sitting in my classroom, and I was grading a whole pile of essay papers. And it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I didn't think I'd finish till 6 o'clock. When I looked at the door, there was the President of the United States. And I'll say it was Obama, okay? And there he was standing there, and he looked at me and he said, "What are you doing here so late?" And I said, "Well, I have all this work to do. I have all these papers." And he says, "You're a very dedicated teacher." And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well," he says, "you know, I'd like to reward you in some way." He said, "What would you like?" And I said, "Well," I said, "you know what?" I said, "I'd like $1 million." So he burst into laughter. He said, "Whoever heard of a rich teacher? That's not going to happen." So he said, "Ask me for something else." So I said, "Okay, you know what? I'd like to be the best teacher in the entire world. I want every student to love me. I want my administrators to love me. I want the parents to love me. I want the school board to love me. I want everybody to love me." Well, the president looked at me and said, "Well, how do you want your $1 million, in tens or 20s?" As I said, I never waste time with a joke. The truth is, I always try my very best to present the lessons in what I hope is an inspiring way. One of the lessons I would like you to take from this is that I feel very guilty that I lost my mother's story and my father's story. And all of you have stories to share with future generations. So please, if you take one thing from this, preserve your stories. They are the legacy for your children that will last a lifetime and more. Thank you so much for listening. I hope I've inspired you. I hope I've shared something with you, and I'm not the man on the camel who just offers you the tie and doesn't explain why it's so important. Thank you.
I hope I get back on to the discussion here. That was absolutely fantastic. We have your story is just amazing, and we have a whole group of questions that have been texted over to me that I hope you have a few minutes to answer.
I'm honored to do anything I can.
Yeah, obviously, writing is in your blood and in your DNA. That poem that you wrote when you were a 12-year-old was absolutely unbelievable. To write that as a 12-year-old, holy smokes! I mean, that obviously was your calling. How did you process your parents' story when you were writing that? How did you come up with that idea, even?
You mean of the poem or the book?
Yes, the poem.
Nightmares. As I said, you know, you would pick up scraps. Isn't it? There's an expression, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Well, just imagine listening to people talking about Mengele, and they're speaking in Polish and Yiddish, and you're picking up scraps. You're terrified, and you don't have anyone to talk to. I had a younger brother who was born in America in December of 1948, about 22 months younger than me. But he did not have the same kind of feeling, I think, about this. And I don't think he was as disturbed by it as I was. So these were nightmares. And my way of expressing myself, because I had no grandparents and I could not really talk to teachers about it, was in writing poetry. was also the way I met girls.
At 12 years old, God bless you.
No, really, really. I would sit in a corner at a party and I'd write poems. And girls would come over and they'd say, wow, this guy's really special. This guy's really deep. And when they found out that my parents were Holocaust survivors and that I was born in Germany, and I was raised very, very strict. So I was always the one who always was very polite. I was always nice with teachers. I didn't fit in. I was like the square peg in a round hole.
After all of your publications, have other second generation family members reached out to you, and what did they tell you?
It's interesting because for a long time, I would not share my thoughts about the Holocaust because I felt I knew so little about my own parents' story. But since I started sharing and since people have been reading my book, we've hit 200 very emotional reviews for the series. And I read every single one of them and I respond to every one of them. You know, as I said in the very beginning, I'm not here to sell books. In fact, Andrew asked me if I wanted an honorarium for this, and I said no. I said, I'm here not to sell books and not to get paid. I'm here because I really want people to know about me. And when I come to a group, I like to feel like I'm friends with them. And I've made new friends. And many people have shared with me their stories. And I have to say, it amazes me that 75 years later, this is such a shadow still in people's lives.
That's amazing. After all of your research and writing, and you even mentioned it a little bit in your talk, do you think that Rumkowski, the devil, should he be, is he in the end, is he a good guy or a bad guy or in the middle, or what do you really think?
You know, I've read books about him. There's a very famous book about him. And the title, they call him the Emperor. He is probably the most enigmatic character I've ever studied. And I've studied a lot of history. And as I said, I've created my own monsters for years and years and years. I can't really judge him. And I don't judge him for my readers. When you read the novels, he is not the central character, but he's the puppet master behind it all. There were other ghetto leaders, one in particular who committed suicide rather than follow the decrees of the Nazis. Rumkowski, I think, really believed that if he turned the Lodz ghetto into an industrial hub for the Nazis, he might be able to save some of the people in the ghetto. He saved my parents, or he may have saved my parents. Of course, I don't really know, but the fact that they survived the Lodz ghetto is probably due to his manipulation. I will tell you that the end of book 3 does show you what happened to Rumkowski at the end. And even that is a mystery.
I've always been quite intrigued when you go to the memorial and when you go to all of the Holocaust museums around, the pictures. I know that the Germans were very much into taking pictures to document what was going on. But the pictures that you showed were, I can't imagine that they were taken by the Germans. Who do you think were taking all of those pictures, and how did they survive?
Well, they were taken by Henrik Ross and Mendel Grossman. And the pictures were buried underground. In fact, the Chronicle itself, they were not allowed to use printing presses. And I should have explained this. The Chronicle was written in the same building where the Nazi administrators of the ghetto were. So it was written under their noses. And if the chroniclers were caught, they would have been either tortured or executed, maybe even deported. Only one of the chroniclers actually survived the war. And he went back and found where the pages were hidden in the ghetto. Some were hidden in a Christian cemetery. Another pile were hidden buried under underground by a fire station. They were not allowed to use the printing press, so they had to use, and I know some of you won't even know about this, carbon paper. And they were allowed to make, Ramkowski had them making 3 copies. So it's really a miracle any of the chronicles survived. And I will tell you, a lot of people who have read my books, which closely follow the chronicle, but create a fictional context for it so that people are held in suspense. Okay, people have told me they can't go to bed at night while reading the book because it just holds them in suspense. They want to know who survived. But a lot of people have gone out afterwards and tried buying the chronicle, and it was published in 1984, and it's never been republished, which is kind of a shame.
Mm. One of the things that you talked about in the beginning was the fact that your mom and dad really did not like to talk to you about their experiences. It almost sounds like soldiers coming back from the war who don't want to talk about what happened to them. But some people do, and there were a lot of survivors, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of our audience knows, that participated with Spielberg. They were very eager, actually, to talk to Spielberg with his project with the Shoah Foundation. Why do you think? What's your feeling about? Why do you think some were eager to talk, and why do you think some of them just took this to their grave?
I think some parents want to protect their children. Okay. I think my parents were preoccupied with survival. I mean, they came here with nothing. My father had $5. My father was many, many things, and he and I never got along. But I have to say one thing about him and my mom. They were both amazingly oriented on survival and on excellence. They both did extremely well in America, coming from nothing. And they enforced on my brother and myself how important education is and how much we had to do to excel. And one of the reasons was because my father said that we had to be protected if there was another Holocaust. But my father was not the kind of person you could talk to about the Holocaust or about almost anything. And in fact, when the Shoah Foundation contacted him, he refused to do a film for them because he felt that it was something that he should be paid to do. And I basically told him, I said, this is something you have to do. And he finally did it. But yeah, he was not the easiest person. I think some people, have a different relationship with their parents, but I've talked to a lot of survivors, and a lot of survivors had issues with their parents, and many, parents did not share with their children everything that happened. They shared the general, but not the details. And I think the general was more frightening than the details in some cases.
Well, I'm sure. Just a quick story for you about, as I said earlier, we've taken a lot of different groups to the memorial in Washington. One group we took was from a local town and the Baptist church. So all African American students, all kids around 12 to 13, 14 years old. And by far, when we were having lunch with this group, I was speaking with them and asking them what they were thinking about. And one of the kids came up with by far the most profound statement that I've ever heard from a 13 or 14-year-old. And I think you'll understand what I'm going to tell you. He said to me, I only thought Black people had ghettos. So it really showed the impact, I think, of showing kids the memorial, which really we really love to do. Your optimism is tremendous. I share it. I hope. But what do you think about all the terrible anti-Semitism going on right now, both in this country and in Europe? What do you think? Where do you think that's going to lead?
It's funny. I've never liked the word anti-Semitism. Let's call it what it is. It's anti-Jewishness. They're basically anti-Jewish. Okay. I think it's very easy to blame a group when things are not going right for you. And so one of the things I think we have to look at are the root causes of this. I don't hate people because they hate me. I think we have to educate them. There was a case recently in Florida where a principal was fired from his job because they claimed he was a Holocaust denier. And I read many, many comments by Jewish people who were not very kind in the way they addressed it, and they actually used profanity. And to me, that's not the answer, okay? I think the answer is education. I think it has to be, I think we have to realize the Holocaust is a symbol of mechanized, systematized murder on a degree never seen before. And we have to learn from it. And we must teach others that it starts with a Kristallnacht and with rumors and fake stories. And we have to be able to combat those. It's worrisome. It is worrisome.
Sure. What are your thoughts then, following the follow-up questions to that, what is your thoughts about Holocaust deniers?
Again, I feel terrible about that because I lost most of my family. My mother had like 8 brothers and sisters. So of course it's a terrible thing. I'll tell you what, I would be willing to send every one of those Holocaust deniers a free copy of my books. I really would. I think they're people who, you know, they're in the desert, and for some reason or another, the man on the camel has not made them understand that that their denial of the Holocaust is also a denial of prejudice they may have experienced. You know, every group that came to America, and even the Native Americans, have experienced prejudice and hate and plots against them and persecution. So I've always felt it was wrong for a Jew to hate anybody or be prejudiced against anybody. And that's why I taught my children, and that's why I taught in my classroom. And that's why I wrote these books.
Well, you know, it was funny. We only spoke on the phone a couple of times, and I didn't know that you were going to show the picture of the shoes. That's one of the things on Zoom that you know, you can change your background. And having been to the museum on multiple occasions now, that when you turn the corner in the museum and you see the shoes, it is just overpowering. And when we talk to the kids about it, it's almost the first thing that comes to their mind. And just looking at the background with the shoes, I can almost smell them, because when you walk in there, you also smell them. And it was amazing that you showed that picture, because I think everybody who has been there has the same picture. And it is probably, I think, one of the most powerful exhibits at the museum, and it brings it all home to you, because it's alive, and it really brings it all out.
One of the questions that I have not been able to really answer is, when did Rumkowski, when did the chroniclers know what the final destination was? And in the book and in the chronicle itself, the first clue is the shoes, and it plays a critical factor in the book. Rumkowski allowed truckload after truckload. He really couldn't stop it, but hundreds of trucks came into the ghetto with the shoes, and they were obviously used, heels and soles torn off them. And they were used as raw material to make other things, some of which were the snowsuits that were used by the Germans when they attacked the Soviet Union. And Rumkowski has been called a collaborator, but again, I leave that to the reader to decide. Okay, I think that's one of the most amazing parts of what I did with this book. I didn't impose my judgment on the reader. I gave the facts, I gave the evidence, I created a story that I hope will grip the reader. And as I said, I'm not here to sell my book, but of course I'd love people to read it, because then they will understand how haunted I am by that picture of the shoes and by the whole story of Rumkowski and what could have been my fate. That's the truth of it. You know, it could have been all of our fates.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One final question. Have you ever been to Loge?
No, I haven't. I will tell you, I have been to Yad Vashem, and I was frightened, terribly frightened to go in. One of the pictures I saw as a child was lampshades made of human skin, piles of human bodies, and I never got over that image. When I tell you I had nightmares, I had horrible nightmares for most of my life, okay? And I don't know, honestly, you know, if I could go back to Lodge. I will tell you, I was on a cruise not long ago, a couple of years ago, and we went to Germany, and I had not been to Germany since I was born there. And I didn't know how I would feel going to Germany. As I said, I don't have any hate in my heart for today's Germans, okay? But I didn't know how I would feel. And I was on this cruise, riverboat cruise, and it was late at night and my wife was asleep and I was up looking at the place where I was born, which was Wiesbaden. And as we passed it, all of a sudden a shiver ran through my body, because among all those beautiful castles and all that beautiful land, someone had painted a swastika on the wall.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you had a couple of nightmares that night.
Yeah. And I will tell you something. You know that story I told you before about the tie? I forgot to tell you one thing. I told that story to my students every single year, and that was a bad thing to do. Because like I said, I could make that last 45 minutes, all right? And I could torture those kids with that. And then I would explain to them what it really meant. And they'd go home and tell their parents. Well, every holiday, like Christmas or Hanukkah or my birthday, guess what they would buy me? Ties. At one point, I had over 300 ties. And the tie I am wearing, and in Florida, I very rarely wear a tie, was given to me by a student in the year 2000. And it's American flags. You can't really see it very well. And it says 2000 on it. And that was the year I retired. And I'm very proud that I have over 1,000 of my former 6th grade students on Facebook with me still. And many of them still remember the story of the camel and the tie.
I'm sure.
And all I can say, and I used to say to them, I used to hang a tie in the front of my classroom. And if a child didn't do their work or got in trouble, I would say to them, "Are you going for the tie?" And so I hope everybody today understands why I was very proud and happy to be here. And I hope everyone here got the tie from me today, and that I explained to everybody why the Holocaust is something that's not part of history, it's part of now. It's something we have to teach now. And if you have a story of your family, whether it's about the Holocaust or anything else, record it, preserve it, learn from my mistakes, because I feel terrible guilt that I don't have every story that my parents could have shared with me. Thank you very much. Andy,
Well,
thank you very much for inviting me.
It's been our absolute privilege and honor to have you speak with us tonight. It's been an amazing evening, and I'm sure that everybody that participated and listened and watched learned something, and your passion and your enthusiasm and your obvious interest and your knowledge is just overwhelming to me. And I want to thank you on behalf of the committee, and I want to thank Joan Litt for getting us in touch with you. And I want to thank everybody for watching tonight. I wish you all a very happy Hanukkah, which, as you know, starts this week. And we'll be working at the Daniel Pearl to be bringing you more programming in the very near future. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night, and good night, Florida.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Newhouse.